What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, continuing my deep dive into Frank Zappa's catalog. Today, this is 7A, Part 1, Uncle Meat. I'm going to talk about Uncle Meat, not play music from Uncle Meat, rant and rave about it. We'll go track by track on this video. There will be a second video where we have like categories and we get into different aspects of the album. But yeah, I'm intimidated by this album. I will be perfectly honest with you for lots of different reasons. But let's start off with my overall sort of my thesis statement about this album. Frank Zappa achieves perfection on this album, and he knows it. That's it. Everything he set out to do on his first 5 albums, Mother Mania, greatest hits collection that he agreed, or a compilation album he agreed to put together as album 6. But everything he set out to do on his first 5 albums, he does it here, and he does it perfectly. And then I have something to follow up to that too, which is kind of contradicts that entire thesis statement, but in a very Frank Zappa way. So, Freak Out, right? We got little pop songs with like lyrics that commentate or commentary on 60s culture. Plus you end that album with like this Return of the Son of Monster Magnet with like tape editing and random stuff and kind of chaos. Yeah, that's all of Uncle Meat. We get little brilliant snippets of songs that pop up every so often. Plus we get a lot of really crazy mad edits. Absolutely free. We're introducing some jazz fusion into the mix in the Colony Vegetable Jam. What do we got on here? We got an entire side devoted to King Kong. Ian Underwood whips it out. We got some lengthy guitar solos that are tweaked because, we're going to combine the studio messing around with tempos and stuff with the actual guitar theatrics. So we got that. We're only in it for the money, editing like crazy, going to the studio and sculpting something that is like even bigger than the songs themselves. Everything about this album is that. Lumpy Gravy, lengthy excerpts of dialogue, voices absolutely mattering and what they're saying and being as much a part as the big note. Lumpy Gravy introduces the big note as everything else. Reuben and the Jets, doo-wop, The Air on this album could have been on Reuben and the Jets. An absolutely wonderful doo-wop song. Everything Frank has done so far is represented somewhere on this album, but it's weirder, more eclectic, more Zappa-esque, more just genius, for lack of a better word. Like, we have his like doo-wop fascination. We have his Stravinsky, his Varese, his classical compositional skills, his guitar skills, which he's going to devote more time with on the following album. All of that is represented here. And I think he knows it. I think he knows this is sort of the culmination of everything he's been working up towards at this point. Because what happens after he records this album? So he records it in like 1967 and 68 over various times and various things. Goes in and does a bunch of percussion overdubs, I think, towards the end of 68. The album comes out in April 21st, 1969. Goes on a European tour, plays some more shows in the States with the Mothers. And then what happens? He pretty much breaks up the band. The band breaks up, and it looks like they will never play again. And what does he go and do after this? He records Hot Rats. And he does this jazz fusion thing in which he's still kind of doing his like symphonic compositional skills mixed in with like these extended jams. We get the Funky Nothingness recordings, which we really don't know anything. We get snippets of, but we don't get the full picture until like, a couple years ago. So he's still exploring this sort of extended kind of jazz fusion, jazz rock atmosphere. But he gets bored with that, I would say, kind of early because he meets Flo and Eddie. And then Flo and Eddie take him in a whole different direction where sort of the sociological Frank Zappa, let's document groupies and what it's like to be a musician on the road and 200 Motels. We get all of that sort of what he is obsessing over. And 200 Motels, in a weird way, is kind of like him trying to replicate Uncle Meat. We get some rock songs. We get some very like sociological, like based on true story type lyrics. We get the classical symphonic stuff, the orchestral stuff. And then we get the incidents that happened at the end of 71, which completely ruin the whole argument, because then, we get the fire, we get him being pushed off stage. He goes into the big band stuff, which who knows what would have happened had that not happened. But it seems like every couple years as you go through his catalog, we have one of those moments where Frank is trying to do something that's like Uncle Meat, where he's trying to once again get to this peak. Leather was kind of like that, right? You have orchestral songs, you have long guitar solos, you have a 20-minute epic, you have all these different facets all on one album. He isn't allowed to put that out because of Warner Brothers. So we end up with several different releases, but his next sort of attempt at that is like Shake Your Booty. You have the teenage rockin' teenage combo in the studio doing the percussion stuff with the weird noises, and Bozio's doing some talking. So he kind of tries to do it again. As you go through the 80s, you got the Synclavier stuff. He's experimenting restlessly. It just really feels like he has reached a creative peak on this album, and for the rest of his career, he's kind of restlessly pursuing this same level of satisfaction. Like he pursues the movie. This is the soundtrack to a movie that never got made. But even after this, he's still working on the movie and recording dialogue for the movie and doing stuff for the movie. When he gets to Baby Snakes and does the Baby Snakes movie, there's a lot of dialogue in the Baby Snakes movie. What are you doing? I'm eating. What is he eating? That whole thing, or the measuring the chicken with it, that all has its origins in the Uncle Meat movie. So it really, my argument is this is a perfect album in Frank Zappa's mind and in many of our minds. He knows it, and he's kind of chasing this dragon for the rest of his career. Basic facts about this album: it's a bizarre reprise release. Zappa produced it himself. It was recorded in various times over 67 and 68. They did some overdubs that I think were mainly percussion in 68. Came out April 21st, 1969. And I totally forgot about who is actually on this album, so I'm inserting this right here before we move on. So Frank Zappa, of course. Ray Collins has some swell vocals. He shows up on this. Jimmy Carl Black, the original bass player, is on here. Don Preston, Billy Mundy, drums on certain pieces before he quits to join Rhinoceros. I already got Billy Mundy. Bunk Gardner's on here. Ian Underwood. Art Tripp doing some amazing percussion. Euclid, Motorhead, Sherwood, Motorhead. And then Pamela Zarupica is playing Susie Cream Cheese on here. So yeah, and Nelsie Walker does some soprano voices on one of the songs, and apparently Ruth is playing marimba and vibes on some of the tracks. So yeah, our beloved Ruth first makes her appearance. So yeah, that is who is on this, onto the rest of this video. And how did we get here? We got here like I already described. It's pretty much everything Frank had been working towards up to this point. He had other projects in mind. As I talked about on both We're Only In It For The Money and Lumpy Gravy, that originally was supposed to be one album. Like Lumpy Gravy Part 1 and Lumpy Gravy Part 2 are that for like contractual reasons. His original vision of that was those We're Only In It For The Money songs, those absolutely perfect psych pop songs, were going to be interspersed with like Lumpy Gravy excerpts, like maybe the piano people, maybe the symphonic stuff, maybe the primordial Lumpy Gravy tracks that were recorded. And so that was supposed to be a bigger project that he wasn't able to realize. So he's always gearing up towards like some massive project. And a lot of times, like if you look at like Joe's Garage, he has these grand visions, and by the end of it, you're like, how did we get here? But I feel like everything about this album, like we got here because where Frank was, who his band was, what his limited resources was, maybe his like failures earlier dealing with record companies. He knew he just had to get this and get this out. And I think it really is just, I don't know, I think he does it. He achieves it. I think really this is like the one shining jewel that for me is on the top of the pyramid of Zappa awesomeness. And the other thing that completely undercuts that completely undermines that theory, is at the end of Lumpy Gravy, or after he had released Lumpy Gravy, he had talked about how the sequencing of the segments in Lumpy Gravy was a random occurrence. He had like long reels of like tapes that he had put together, and he snippeted, he cut them up, threw them up, and randomly reassembled them. And that's why Lumpy Gravy is what Lumpy Gravy is, inspired by a John Cage interview he had read. And I think there was an interview after this where he said something along the line that you can take all of his work, throw it up, randomly put it together, and it's going to make sense because it's all part of the big note. So in a weird sense, this album, you could take all of these tracks, throw them in the air, randomly put them together, and it's still probably going to be a work of genius. So there is that sort of accidental quality that this sequencing of tracks is the one we got, possibly. Who knows how intentional it actually was. But I do think the sequencing is perfect. I do think that the best way to listen to this album is side A, absorb side A, sit with side A, then go to side B. Sit with side B, then go to side C. Sit with side C, then go to D. I'm going to discuss each side separately here. So if you don't know what they are, I'll give you the indexes if you have the CDs or are streaming it. Also, you can go online and I think Wikipedia has it broken up by the original release so you can see what A and B is. This is one of those albums, much like I said with Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask replica. If you try to digest it as an entire whole, it can be incredibly overwhelming. But when you look at each side as a standalone piece of composition, each side has like a classic pop song with weird Frank Zappa lyrics that might mean something, might not mean something. Who knows? It's up to your interpretation. There's some like classical symphonic element. There's some jazz element. There's every side is kind of perfect. All right, before we get into the actual side, opening and closer, I do want to talk about the opening and closer because I think those are always important. The opening track is the Uncle Meat main title theme, which right off lets you know that this was supposed to be a movie. This is the soundtrack to that movie that doesn't exist. The opening theme starts off with the percussion. You got some drums. The horns come in, this really nice sort of pulsating like keyboard, sort of the pulse of the song, this nice keyboard action. At one point, like the woodwinds and the horns drop in. Things get avant-garde, electronic, noisy towards the end. Yeah, it's just... It lets you know this is not a normal album. It gives you a theme that's going to be repeated throughout the album. There's going to be variations on Uncle Meat as we go through this album. You know the percussion's going to be prominent. You know there's going to be horns and woodwind. Like it's all here other than like an actual lyrical song. Perfect opener. And the last track on here, absolutely fascinating. The actual side D is all King Kong. So it's studio version of King Kong broken up into different components kind of depending on who's soloing. And then the very last segment is King Kong. It's 7.5 minutes long, the actual last track. King Kong live on a flatbed diesel in the middle of a racetrack at a Miami pop festival, ... The Underwood ramifications as Ian Underwood takes the main solo. Sound quality is not as good as pretty much everything else because it was recorded on a flatbed trumpet at a Miami Pop Festival. I think these are the only tapes that remain. I think Frank references this somewhere else about recording. He had recorded the Whiskey Show and had recorded something else and immediately like dismisses that as being an absolutely disaster of an experience. But we go through this 3.5 sides of music in which you have symphonic stuff and Stravinsky stuff and snatches of conversation and Susie Cream Cheese says stuff and some weird twisted doo-wop 60s psych pop numbers. And then we end with a live performance of them doing King Kong, this jazz rock fusion thing on a flatbed truck. Some of the most amazing musicians you have ever heard. Frank Zappa, who just laid forth this entire 3.5 sides of music you've just listened to that are just sound like nothing else that came out in the 60s. Just in the rock world, nobody's doing what Frank is doing here. And yet you still have moments of like pop beauty that could have been on the radio had it not been Frank Zappa and the Mothers, or had the lyrics maybe been different, but the melody's been the same. And you get to the end and you have 7.5 minutes on the back of a diesel truck at a Miami Pop Festival for an instrumental called King Kong. Absolutely a phenomenal way to end this album. And it also a really good way of capturing what the Mothers were kind of really about if you went to see them live, where kind of Frank would be going after this. It is a very much a great swan song for this era of Frank, because going forward, the next album, Ian Underwood's going to be featured really heavily on Hot Rats. He's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that. I think Frank is even directly laid some of the inspiration at Ian Underwood's feet, and working with Ian over these years and all the inspiration it brought Frank. And we know that as listeners, how essential Underwood is to this era of Frank Zappa. And to end with him, the Underwood Ramifications, that's the last title on the album, and it's live and it's a monstrous song. Yeah, it's a great opener and a great closer. All right, what do we have on this? So side A, I think, is probably one of the most perfect sides of music ever. I think it is challenging. If you buy this in 1969 and you're listening to this and trying to figure it out, you're just you're probably lost and probably overwhelmed, but in the best way possible. Opens up with Uncle Meat, the title theme. That goes into 27 seconds of Susie Cream Cheese talking about things, and she ends up with I've come home to my mother's, right? Awesome. She recognizes her mother's. We get some burps. We get some snorks that would go throughout the album. Then we get 6 minutes of 9 types of industrial pollution. A guitar solo that is sped up. We get the full guitar solo on Meat Light, the slowed down version, over a percussion groove that I think is actually slowed down. And this is the same sort of percussion track that I believed is used for Theme from Burnt Weenie Sandwich. And you can also find parts of this on Finer Moments, the track Enigmas 1 through 5. And this is Arthur Tripp just doing a bunch of percussion stuff. And yeah, I feel like this song, 9 Types of Industrial Pollution, the title is absolutely perfect, because the title, the drum, the percussion energy, that's sort of drums, it's percussion, it's heavy, it's things are falling apart and being hit upon. That is the industrial pollution, and that guitar line that weaves and winds its way through is life. It's us, it's humans, it's nature trying to exist and find a path through, 20th century, now 21st century, all the sort of things that modernity and technology and industry are just imposing on our worlds. And to throw this 6 minutes, a minute, 2.5 minutes into this album, and you're just all of a sudden in this 6 minute completely indulgent guitar solo, that's a gutsy move. Gutsy move. That goes into Zoller Zockel, Czakl, which is bouncy, whimsical, avant-garde classical music. Get some weirdness toward the end. We get some snorks. And then finally, we're 8 minutes into the album, we get pure pop awesomeness with Dog Breath and the Year of the Plague. It is East LA meets 60s soul, meets twisted doo-wop, meets full-on Mothers of Invention. It's a little sociological aspect, a little in-jokes from the Mothers. You get El Monte, reference to El Monte, memories of El Monte. You get car culture. You get 2.5 minutes of absolute 60s East LA psych pop perfection. Then 2.5 minutes in, it gets avant-garde, it gets experimental. The compositional elements, the stuff that he's doing with these keyboards and percussion, kind of remind me of stuff he would do on Civ 3 with his synclavier. It just has that kind of compositional element to it, that just frantic, I don't even know what's going on. Are these even humans playing it stuff? But this is 67, 68 stuff. Humans are playing it. That goes into The Legend of the Golden Arches, which is the first appearance officially in the catalog of Pound for a Brown on the Bus, we'll get to that when we talk about the song. which is, we get the main theme for that, a little secondary theme, we get some snorks. This eventually goes into some sort of like Uncle Meat variations on the Uncle Meat theme. We get some like harpsichord action, some horns. Finally, we end up with some Susie cream cheese, where she talks about how one of the mother's people who were, in the scene at the time didn't know how they would get big, because somebody was always telling Frank to turn down your amplifiers. That goes right into Louie Louie at the Royal Albert Hall in London, in which Don Preston plays Louie Louie on the Royal Albert Hall organ, and it is really, really loud and distorted. They do not turn down their amplifiers. Little strangled horn solo in there, and then we close side A with the dog breath variations. Great acoustic guitar, some kind of cheesy little keyboard sounds. Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Side A is perfect. Side B might also be perfect too. Sleeping in a Jar opens up. Wow. Interesting vocals. Yeah, who knows what it means to be sleeping in a jar. Absolutely fascinating. Surreal, but not. Yeah. Deep dive these lyrics. We'll talk about the lyrics more in the next video. The drums are great. The horns are great. The lyrics are super intriguing. Song kind of unwinds at the end. It's like 51 seconds, but completely memorable. That goes into Our Bizarre Relationship. Susie Cream Cheese is talking about Frank and Laurel Canyon and giving everybody crabs and groupies and stuff like that. Then we get the Uncle Meat variations. Exercise 4, which would get played in 73, would pop up in 73. Like the first 55 seconds, minute of this is something that Frank would be known as Exercise 4, and Frank would start playing live in 73. But we get the Uncle Meat variations, which are variations on the Uncle Meat theme. We got horns, we got woodwinds coming in here, we got keyboards, we got percussion, we get some twisted sort of dog meat lyrics that come in at some point. At about 3.5 minutes into this, we go into this like psych rock guitar jam with a little nice, really tasty, flavorful little guitar solo that's absolutely, absolutely amazing. And then this goes into Electric Aunt Jemima. Another absolutely perfect, catchy, melodic earworm of a pop song. It's weird. It's got some weird lyrics. Who knows what they're about? They're kind of surrealistic. Beat Me Till I'm Hungry. Found a Punk to Rob. Some great stuff in here. Little snippet of the Piano People from Lumpy Gravy pop up at the end. Apparently the actual Electric Aunt Jemima was an amplifier that they were using at one point on a tour. So that's what the title comes from. That goes into Prelude to King Kong, which is 3.5 minutes of everybody blowing anything anybody could blow, they're blowing. And we're jamming out to King Kong, and these solos are swirling around each other and twirling around each other, and it's just a blistering 3.5 minutes of just electronic jazz rock craziness that's absolutely amazing. The beat at the end is very like Charles Ives-ish, which is that dun 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 dun, just that really kind of demanding, hectic, sort of like frantic, like drum beat. We get like a sort of a proto techno version of a Charles Ives beat in the end, and everybody's they're just flying all over the place as they go off. Absolutely amazing. That goes into God Bless America, live at the Whiskey A Go-Go, a little snippet from that in which they played God Bless America. Then we get the actual official debut of A Pound for a Brown on the Bus. Title coming from Browning means to essentially moon, except you don't just moon, you moon and kind of spread. And Jimmy Carl Black bet Bunk Gardner that he wouldn't do it on the bus, and they bet him £1 because they were in England. And so he bet him £1 that he wouldn't brown on the bus, and Bunk did, and the song was born. And then we close out with Ian Underwood Whips It Out, live on stage in Copenhagen. This is a snippet from a 10/1/1967 King Kong. We get the introduction of Ian, which he explains how he introduced himself to the group. Frank tells him to whip it out. And we get a saxophone solo from Ian Underwood that is absolutely amazing. This whole thing's I think it's like 3.5, 4 minutes, right? It's like 3.5 minutes. Oh, no, it's 5 minutes, including the little snippet in the beginning and all that, of Ian just whipping it out on sax. in the middle of a King Kong with that little Charles Ives dun 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 vamp going on in the background. And the very last notes on side B is Ian going kind of just squealing away as the song ends. Side B is also perfect. Side C opens up with Mr. Green Jeans, another perfect pop song. We're tying back. Ray Collins is here, baby. Ray Collins. We get his beautiful, beautiful voice singing this. More just weird lyrics about eating things, and vegetables are here and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like chamber pop. It's just absolutely amazing stuff. Just that dun, just a great bass tone of this. We Can Shoot You is next. 2 minutes of like a percussion detour. We get some percussion energy, some sort of conducting horn blurts madness in there. Some compositional elements come in with like horns and keyboards. Very avant-garde studio seriousness. Then, what might be the most fascinating track on this entire thing, if we'd all been living in California, Jimmy Carl Black and Frank Zappa discussing money and being in the band and touring and how hard it is and like not being able to pay their bills. And the fact that Frank is recording this and releases it, it's just great. It's awesome to hear this discussion. Absolutely fantastic. Next is The Air, straight up doo-wop classic, just amazing. This could have been on Reuben and the Jets. The lyrics maybe are a little darker than some of the stuff on Reuben on the Jets. We get a reference to the jar, get a reference to some like spousal problems. The whole line about my hands are gripping, but they're slipping and they're dripping because I'm tripping. We used to always talk about when we were in college and we were walking around Berkeley late at night because we weren't able to sleep. We used to quote this song because we always thought our hands were dripping for very specific reasons, and this gave us the language from which to speak about that. Busted coming through customs, the car culture. No Graham Nash reference. We'd get Graham Nash references in the Flo and Eddie version of this, but not here. And then another absolutely amazing composition, Project X, the beginning of which, those opening chords, starts off with an acoustic guitar playing chords that kind of sound like Kiss Me underneath I don't know what movie that was in. I think they used it in Not Another Teen Movie, but it's that Sixpence None the Richer. Was that the name of the band? Sixpence None the Richer? Sixpence None the Richer. Kiss Me. You know the song. But it sounds like that. And then it goes off into some really weird woodwind percussion, classical, avant-garde, Stravinsky, Varese type stuff. And every time that acoustic guitar comes back in, it is so beautiful. It is so calming. It is so, does not feel like Frank, but it somehow works perfectly on this album. Yeah, it's just absolutely amazing. We get some weirdness that comes in, and we go back to like the Project X main themes. An absolutely beautiful song, absolutely beautiful composition, just sitting right here towards the end of this album, or at least at the end of side 3. And then after that is Cruisin' for Burgers, which is just another perfect song. You're in a car, you're cruising around, freedom as a teenager. Amazing. And then side D is King Kong. All of it. It's like, 18, 17 minutes of King Kong. We get a studio version of King Kong, divided up into a number of different tracks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tracks. King Kong itself, the main theme. We don't have any of the secondary themes that would be added in later live performances. King Kong, its magnificence as interpreted by Don Preston. That's like just over a minute. King Kong, as Motorhead explains it, with his frenetic tenor sax stylings. We get about 1 minute and 45 of that, with Preston doing some more keyboard stuff at the end. King Kong, the Gardner varieties, we get like a full 6 minutes of this with Bunk going off. He's got some really awesome sort of electronic effects on his sax, so it sounds really crazy and out there. Frank's playing some really, really good rhythm guitar on this. That goes back into King Kong is played by 3 deranged good humor trucks, in which the main theme is kind of deconstructed in a very sort of weird mechanical electronic Frank way. And then that goes in to the track I talked about earlier, the 7+ minutes of them playing live on a flatbed diesel in the middle of a racetrack at a Miami Pop Festival, the Underwood Ramifications. That's it. It is a fantastic journey. It is a long journey. It is a draining journey. It is a journey that I recommend you take. If you're new to this album, approach side A, absorb side A, then move on to B, then move on to C. And side D almost exists as sort of a treat. It's like when we go to like early childhood conferences here. I'm a kindergarten teacher. Usually you'll have at the end of it, on like the final day, the keynote speaker, like it was Lily Tomlin once, which is crazy here in Texas because she's still pretty liberal with her jokes. In Texas, a lot of Texas teachers are not. This is still Texas. But you usually get some treat at the end that's like, all right, you've done all this work. Let's relax and have a good time. You have like a party at the end or whatever. That's what King Kong is. It's like the party at the end of the journey. You've earned it by the time you've sat through the first 3 sides. So yeah, this has been really long. I'm going to wrap up this video. I got more to say in part 2. Let me know things I missed, things I messed up on, all that kind of stuff. Subscribe, like, share, comment. You know how that stuff works. Peace. Talk to you later.